In the late 18th century, France stood as one of the grandest kingdoms in Europe, a land of culture, intellect, and immense power. The Palace of Versailles glittered with chandeliers, its walls covered in gold and mirrors, its gardens stretching endlessly into the horizon. The nobles danced in silken gowns, and the court of King Louis XVI seemed eternal. But beneath that glitter, the soul of France was breaking. The gap between rich and poor had grown into an abyss. The peasantry paid nearly all the taxes, while the nobles paid almost none. Bread, the simplest necessity, became a luxury that many could no longer afford. The countryside was filled with famine. Crops had failed, prices had soared, and wages were stagnant. Women stood for hours in long queues for a single loaf of bread. Children died of hunger. In towns and villages, desperation grew into rage. King Louis XVI was not cruel, but he was blind. A gentle man in private, yet weak as a ruler. He loved locks, hunting, and science, but not politics. He failed to grasp how desperate his nation had become. Meanwhile, Queen Marie Antoinette, though often misrepresented, became a symbol of royal excess. "Let them eat cake," a phrase she likely never said, became the cry that defined her in the public eye. Whether fair or not, the people saw her as the face of their suffering. Long before the streets of Paris exploded, another kind of revolution had begun in the minds of thinkers. Across Europe, a movement known as the Enlightenment was challenging the old order. Philosophers like Voltaire, Rousseau, and Montesquieu questioned monarchy, religion, and inequality. They wrote that liberty, not birthright, should define a man's worth. In salons and coffee houses, educated citizens debated these radical ideas. What is the purpose of government, they asked? To serve the people or to rule them? Books and pamphlets spread faster than ever before, thanks to the printing press. The people of France were no longer willing to accept their misery as destiny. The age of reason had lit a fire that could not be put out. By the 1780s, France's economy was on the brink of ruin. Years of costly wars, including the American Revolution, had drained the treasury. The government borrowed endlessly, but taxes kept falling on the same exhausted shoulders, the poor. Louis XVI's ministers tried to reform the system, but the privileged classes, clergy and nobility, blocked every attempt. They refused to lose their exemptions. Finally, in desperation, the king summoned the Estates General, a national assembly representing the three estates, the clergy, the nobility, and the commoners. It was the first such meeting since 1614. What was meant to be a solution became the spark that ignited the revolution. The third estate soon realized that their votes counted less than those of the privileged few, even though they represented nearly the entire population of France. Furious, they broke away and declared themselves the National Assembly, the true representatives of the people. When the king tried to lock them out of the meeting hall, they gathered instead in a nearby indoor tennis court and swore the tennis court oath they would not disband until France had a constitution. That moment marked the birth of modern democracy in France. On July 14th, 1789, Paris erupted. Rumours spread that the king's troops were marching to crush the assembly. Armed with nothing but anger and courage, thousands of citizens stormed the Bastille, a medieval fortress prison that symbolised royal tyranny. The battle was brutal. Gunfire, smoke, and chaos filled the streets. When the Bastille finally fell, the people tore it apart, stone by stone. Its fall became the ultimate symbol of liberation, the day when the French people overthrew fear itself. That day is still celebrated as Bastille Day, France's national holiday. The countryside soon followed. Peasants rose against landlords, burning tax records and seizing lands. This uprising, called the Great Fear, swept across France, erasing centuries of feudal oppression. In August 1789, the National Assembly responded with a document that changed history, the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen. It proclaimed that all men are born free and equal, that sovereignty belongs to the people, and that law should reflect the will of all. These words would echo through centuries, inspiring revolutions across continents. Still, hunger and anger raged. In October, thousands of women from Paris marched nearly 20 miles to Versailles, armed with knives, sticks, and courage. Their demand was simple: bread for their starving families. When they arrived, soaked by rain, they stormed the palace gates. The royal family was forced to leave Versailles, and returned to Paris as captives of their own people. The monarchy's power was shattered. The revolution now had no turning back. Over the next 2 years, France transformed completely. Old titles and privileges were abolished. Church lands were seized and sold to fund the revolution. A new calendar was even created. Time itself was being rewritten. But not everyone agreed on what the revolution should become. Moderates wanted reform. Radicals wanted total change. Outside France, monarchs trembled. They feared their own people might follow this dangerous example. In 1791, Louis XVI tried to flee to Austria. He was caught in the town of Varennes. That single act destroyed the last remnants of trust between king and people. By 1792, France declared war on Austria and Prussia. It was no longer just a revolution, it was a war for survival. Amid chaos and foreign invasion, Paris became a city of suspicion. In 1792, the monarchy was formally abolished and France became a republic. The king, now a prisoner, was accused of treason. On January 21, 1793, Louis XVI was executed by guillotine before a silent crowd. The blade fell, and a kingdom that had lasted for centuries was gone in an instant. Marie Antoinette followed months later. Her final words, "Pardon me, sir, I did not do it on purpose," spoken to the executioner she accidentally stepped on, became a haunting symbol of fallen royalty. With the king dead, power shifted to the revolutionaries, and soon to one man, Maximilien Robespierre. Brilliant, incorruptible, and terrifyingly idealistic, Robespierre believed that liberty could only be preserved through purity, and purity through terror. Without virtue, terror is disastrous, he said. Without terror, virtue is powerless. Between 1793 and 1794, tens of thousands were executed. Nobles, priests, merchants, even fellow revolutionaries. The guillotine became a permanent fixture in the heart of Paris. Fear ruled. Neighbours denounced neighbours. The revolution, which began with hope, was now devouring its own. Yet, even amid the bloodshed, progress endured. Slavery was abolished in French colonies, and education was declared a universal right. The ideals of equality were being written into law, even as heads rolled. By 1794, the terror reached its limit. The people, exhausted by fear, turned against Robespierre. On July 28, 1794, he too met the guillotine, the very instrument of his rule. His death ended the reign of terror. France sighed in relief, but it was a broken, traumatized nation. From the chaos, a new figure emerged. Napoleon Bonaparte, a young general who promised stability. Through his victories, he restored France's pride. The people, weary of revolution and blood, embraced his leadership. In 1799, Napoleon seized power through a coup. By 1804, he crowned himself emperor, not by divine right, but by the power of the people's will. France was once again an empire, but its foundation was no longer monarchy. It was merit, ambition, and the legacy of revolution. The revolution's message, liberty, equality, fraternity, echoed far beyond France. In South America, Simón Bolívar drew inspiration from it to fight colonial rule. In Europe, peasants and citizens began questioning authority. Even in America, the ideals of universal rights grew stronger. The revolution forever changed how people saw government and themselves. It proved that rulers could fall and that ordinary people could shape history. The cost was immense: famine, civil war, executions, and years of instability. Yet, through suffering, a new world was born. France emerged as a modern nation, guided not by kings, but by laws. The ideas born in that storm would later inspire movements for democracy, women's rights, and freedom across centuries. The French Revolution was not just a political upheaval, it was a redefinition of humanity itself. It shattered the illusion of divine power and gave birth to a new truth, that the people, united, hold the greatest strength of all. From the cobblestones of Paris to the battlefields of Europe, its echo still resounds. Once people learn to rise, they can never again kneel.